historical structure, which I will try to detail in a bit. And it could subsume a whole class of young men raised in certain parts of Bangalore in 1970s and early 80s. In my reckoning, two distinct sub-regions constituted Bangalore along those 2 decades. It could be many more, but in my reckoning, it is two. One was the cantonment region we call it. Historically, middle class, but it came from the other class. While the description of the historical form and the historical structure form the burden of the presentation, I'm interested in the, uh, I'm using a very ambitious term, in the metaphysics of the historical meaning, and this intervention will attempt to uncover what I would refer to as numinous experience, some kind of religious experience, in these circumstances that I'm talking about. In effect, I've taken the task of unraveling the historical prejudices and the historic logic through staging the I, which is me, as a variant of this Bangalore boy experienced in this particular region through the culture of cinema, sports, popular literature that fashions the multiple worlds of the Bangalore boy. For Gadama, prejudice would mean prejudgment. In other words, historical determination is not the only axis around which meaningful experiences would be understood. To extend the logic, our everyday life is governed by contingent conditions where we can talk about historical context of meaning, like language, concept, norms, these are the context of meaning, and also by ahistorical forces, especially the kind of residual culture that are bodily comportment sediments, the sediments of it which are there in our comportment. I have written extensively on Brahmin comportment. The last one is in terms of popular public culture. A historical force that helps us interpret. Now, what do we do with this comportment? It helps us interpret novel situations and circumstances. A little bit about the form or the type, as you call it. A generic description of the Bangalore boy would read as being cool, friendly, less judgmental about family ties and kinship bonds, less obsessed with professional or personal goals, less entrepreneurial, a corporeal style that took to feet with ease. You have different bodily styles. Some styles take to sports, some styles take to other intellectual lines. So this is a bodily style which took to sports very easily, including an acoustically inclined disposition to listen and perform music of a popular kind. Uh, the body was the immediate site of improvement and not the calculable intellect. For these people, in that particular region, body was the site. It's almost like saying that modernity produced thinking bodies rather than rational, calculable minds. Playgrounds have been the informal temples of learning how to navigate the male bodies through the challenges of the present and future. In, in Bangalore, especially in the Confluence region, every street used to have a playground, and we played either football or hockey mostly. That while the other side of Bangalore played cricket, we played hockey and football. uh, Pain, warmth, a little about the playground. Pain, warmth, joy, anger, injury, collegiality, team spiritedness, the immeasurable articulateness, of the body's capacity for grasping and living life formed what I would say the measure of affirming life. In contrast to the generation's middle class aspiration, which I was not sure of, but now when I'm recalling it, I'm trying to contrast it. Because I don't think at that moment we knew the varieties and I in the early, in late 70s. Uh, in contrast to the generation's middle class aspiration to place undue emphasis on discursive intelligibility's capacity to affirm life in an unlimited manner. I'm trying to make a contrast between a calculable intellect and a bodily style, where the bodily style does not excessively affirm life, whereas the calculable intellect affirms life on an unlimited scale. And it was an excess affirmation by the calculable intellect. The flip side of the emphasis given to the corporeal side was that the Bangalore boy does not become adult. So I'm 35 or 36, and this colleague says you're a Bangalore boy in peace. There is a certain limits to what you can do in life. There is a certain kind of powers that you can perhaps expand. There are certain kinds of powers which are limited. That is the point you're trying to make metaphorically. Uh, can I have some water? The flip side of the emphasis given to the corporeal side was that the Bangalore boy does not become an adult, and the modernity project about what Emmanuel Kant said from immaturity to becoming mature seems to be a problem, or even the lacking the courage to think for oneself. From being agricultural laborers to becoming army jawans, the conditions for aspiring to think for oneself rarely existed. So Bangalore Boy designates the physical growth. I mean, there is a certain way of looking at corporeal as a much larger kind of a category, bodily style. But here I'm reducing it to the materiality. Bangalore Boy designates that the physical growth has a short expiry date beyond which it cannot be manipulated to yield any material consequences. Like getting a job to the sports quota, many of them got jobs to the sports quota, in the lower and sometimes middle level jobs in the expanding PS, public sector industries in the 70s and late 60s and early 70s, like banks, railways, newly established PSUs. They moved from army to PSUs in some ways, like Benwell, like NCHL. The figure exemplifies a way of being, a manner of unreflexively orchestrating one's gendered thought and affective dispositions, a certain kind of comportment towards the world. Now, this description assumes that the figure manifests, shows, or becomes, or becoming in time, but the vetting of his styles of masculinization have a basis in some kind of what can we call it, a pre-theoretical awareness, not conscious, uh, that refuses to be contained by only historic logic. If by history one is suggesting that contingent reflects randomness, comportment offers an interpretation of the randomness and makes possible a familiar looking environment. Uh, so when you go to a completely new place, it's never strange because we bring a certain familiarity to that. And that familiarity is brought through the idea of comportment. And cultures, communities have different kinds of comportment. And I'm examining one of those communities here. So Bangalore Boy is suggestive of a certain cultural psychic arrangement where things and ideas are not randomly strewn around, but have an inner coherence and an inner history. However diverse they seem to appear. The figure stands for policing both an inner and an external history. I have elsewhere argued that for the Brahmin community, the power of interpretation accorded to the inner history of a historically continuous community allows it to stake claim for cultural and moral leadership across epochs. But such a power of interpretation cannot be granted to the inner history of the lower class. Now, this narrative does not concern itself whether the disposition of or the underclass comportment's capacity for interpreting novel situations is an authentic articulation or just a product of contingencies. In some ways, I'm trying to suggest that we are not creatures of just historical forces, but there is something that we bring to examine the historical forces, communities bring to examining how we interpret, the power to interpret, and the power to stay, and the power to build a world for ourselves. Uh, a little bit about the kinship networks. Larger kinship gatherings happened when any cousin came on a vacation, on a military vacation, and it was the usual practice that they shared their goodies, including rum. Uh, uh, they used to serve in Kashmir and other Ladakh. They used to have lots of milkmaid containers used to come, soaps and other toiletries freely given to Jawans and others. And they're also bought at extremely subsidized prices in military canteens. For those of you who are familiar with Bangalore's landscape, the canteen used to be located near BRB theatre. Sometimes they used to sell it openly also. I'm also looking at the materiality of the military culture. These young men, when they went to the village to meet their wives, raising the children or the pregnant partners, and they also participated in farming during the holidays. But they always prefer to come to Bangalore to spend part of the vacation chilling with their city cousins. I don't remember these cousins bringing the wives along to Bangalore during the vacation. Of course, they did take them when they found adequate housing facilities in the various postings across the country. There's some people who have married women northeast, and they used to speak very good Tamil later. Along with rum, these Jawans also carried the village produce, namely very close. Vellore is very close, and they have farms there, and they used to get peanuts, millet, brinjals, and they used to take this night train called night mail, which used to take almost 11 hours because it is a slow train. It's on a meter gauge. Now we don't have meter gauge, and they use that train also because it could carry many sacks. And there used to be a cycle waiting outside when they came, and they used to. And we lived in Samanir also. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up in what can be characterized as the anglicized Tamil cantonment working class region of Bengaluru. I'd like to believe that this region doesn't exist anymore, or has mutated to such an extent that I do not relate to this in the way that many residents of my generation find it difficult to connect. How would one like to describe this anglicized, Tamilized region, which is made up of several cultures, but primarily the military culture? From the 70s, the expanding public sector industries replaced the military establishment as the main job provider, but the underlying ethos of the military Jawan culture remained. Many of them after the military work, they went and joined this PSU because they retired pretty early. Most of my older relatives, and here I'm trying to suggest that quite a few masculinities available within the military itself. There was not one type of masculinity. Most of my older relatives who came to Bangalore were already drafted into the colonial army and had fought in World War One and World War Two. Actually, not always did men drafted into army perform combat operations. For instance, an uncle was trained by the army to do tailoring. We used to call it tailor. I mean, he continued doing that job much later as he came out of the army. Now, the joke, another close relative entertained the Second World War through, with his flair for composing plays and music. He used to entertain the troops. The joke about this relative was that he cheated the colonial army with his rules, with his tricks, by never lifting a gun and only indulging in entertaining the troops, which is theatrical and musical gifts. Now, these two illustrations point to the fact that there were multiple masculinities within the army itself. Notwithstanding the variety of jobs that they performed in the army, their offsprings found jobs, continue to find jobs in the Indian Army, and of course, the emerging PSUs till the 80s. While I say Tamilize and Anglicized, I would also like to qualify this and qualify it today as being inadequately Anglicized or inadequately Tamilized. But nevertheless, it has its own cultural psychodynamics. And I recognize this superficial is a judgment that is being made now, and not when I participated in what appeared to be an uncharted flow of life. Because that flow of life it was experienced, and many youths of my generation from the city suburbs perhaps had actually a direction, a purpose without being pursued. This flow of life or cultural energy, which is being characterized as inadequately anglicized and Tamilized, embodied the figure called the Bengal board. Let me start with the politics of naming that they used to in the village and what happens when they come to the city that is in front of it. Let me start with the cultural politics of names that connected the village and also the practices that they informally, used to in the city. According to an uncle of mine, 1947 was a historic year because from that year onwards, they could anoint the children with Vaishnavite names freely in the North Arcot village, roughly 2 hours drive from Bangalore. A later generation found that they could socialize in the city with anglicized Christian names like Tom's would be for Thomas, John, Paul. My close relative's name was Govindraj, but he was a senior person, but he was addressed as Thomas. Another friend, Etiraj, was addressed as John, and someone else was Paul, and so on. While there was a lack of public scrutiny on the anglicizing tendencies, there was a guarded approach towards sanskritizing and also the DMK kind of Tamilizing idea. I'm also trying to suggest that the Dravidian identity was also very coyly shied by this aspiring middle class of this underclass, and they shied away from the certain kind of Dravidian thing. The, my father's generation knew Tirukural, but did not feel it necessary to demonstrate the worthiness of his cultural heritage to the children, but are eager to display the ability to purchase English newspapers or listen to Vivid Bharati, English news, or send the children to some inexpensive English medium schools. This is, I say, slightly more the latter. There's a spectrum in which, this is something which I won't do because there's also an English department, a spectrum in which English existed for the subaltern communities. The English moved from the army's butlers, there were a lot of uncles who were butlers, to the emerging English that was spoken in the railways, they worked in railways, government offices, in the marketplaces and neighborhoods of Fraser Town, Coxtown, Cooktown, Dandy Road, Hutchins Road, Mosque Road, and so on. The Muslim butcher in Coxtown addressed his customers mostly in English. However, the anglicized Tamils were captivated by the oral oratic power of English, but invested less in the literary, documentary, or commercial exploitation of the imperial language. They had not access to the literary, documentary, or commercial exploitation. They were very invested in just speaking, which didn't require functional English, did not require a very elaborate, vocabulary. uh, so, at home, children are made to read school texts, especially in English language, very loudly. The performative took over the textual, and the performative existed without the ability to maneuver the written textual to expand their what we call as the languaging potential, languaging potential. To make the point, this is what a certain sense of superficial anglicization pronounce. Uh, I'll talk about sports and then move over to other areas. If one residing in the cantonment area, you watch Tamil movies, at least one member in a family played hockey for Karnataka State Hockey Association, listened to Radio Ceylon and sang Tamil songs, watched an English movie once in a while on Brigade Road, and had relatives either working in the lower echelons of the army, railways, uh, and the public sector. At 6 in the morning and 3 in the evening, most roads, I'm talking about the 70s, in Bangalore of the early 70s were flooded with public sector buses. Uh, in fact, the public sector buses were more than the Bangalore city buses at that time. It was a period of expanding bureaucracy and the insertion of institutions that came to be known as in the European socialist era, and the figure of the Bangalore boy is intricately connected to this expanding bureaucratic logic. The colonial army provided the initial infrastructure for the underclass to its predecessors, be it social, cultural, or philosophical, to gain an entry into the state-making process. This was a time, and I think this was a time, I could be wrong, in the life of this city where linguistic, regional, religious, caste or class identity had not apparently achieved distinct articulation. I guess my childhood belonged to that time. If one is not socialized into linguistic, religious, or caste identities, how does one live life without any anchor? Perhaps through industrialized popular culture like cinema, newspapers, film songs, popularized through radio Ceylon, and participating in field sports like hockey and football. Every street corner was converted into a playground and the neighborhood indulged in hockey or football. A particular genealogy of sports culture among the subaltern communities initially came from the long association with the military establishment and later on with the BSc. Uh, some of the images that I have and how these images changes with the becoming of a middle class. At home, I was privy to hockey sticks and boxing blouses, which were part of the sporting paraphernalia of the military culture that a growing Bangalore boy inherited in the 60s. Military uniforms were immaculately pressed, the belts and medals polished splendidly. These artifacts almost took on a certain totemic power. The steel rim of the cycle tire and the spokes were cleaned and brushed thoroughly almost every day. But people walked long distances and rarely felt tired to walk back and forth from Hosur to Russell Market in Suvarnam, but the roads were almost free from traffic. uh, yeah. I noticed in one of my summer vacation visits to my village in Nandakar, an old broken harmonium graced the site. I'm also trying to say this Bangalore boy was not disconnected from the village. There was a certain kind of connection with different spaces. I mean, uh, so music was something that everyone shared, and most men sang Tamil film songs, including some women at festivals and marriages and funerals after being drunk. The tape recorder technology produced an efflorescence of singing and performative culture among the 1970s younger generation. The novelty of the tape recorder attracted many informal family gatherings, where some cousin, like television attracted, even the tape recorder attracted many informal gatherings. The novelty of the tape recorder attracted many informal family gatherings, where some cousin would ingeniously convert the metal pot, water pot, being used as a container for into a percussion instrument. and give support to the vocalist. Sorry. The deftness of the fingers was unmistakable when they played it. And many of the old numbers of GT and A.V. Raja would be sung within the old singers. Every morning we used to wake up because of the tape recorder to the Murugan songs of Sirgari Govindarajan, who was not particularly sweet to the ears. But the voice had a robustness that facilitated a spirited entry into an otherwise dull industrial day. Though it did not fit into the typical Sanskritizing model, it did broaden the Sanskritizing horizon of accommodating the holy Tamil Bhakti musical performative tradition into a popular audio music industry of the late 70s and early 80s. The time of Indira Gandhi's emergency was the time of the arrival of the tape recorder, at least in this part of the city, and nurturing of the distinct and performative acoustic culture among the larger family. The last one, and then I'll stop. This is about cinema. Just spoke about sports and a little bit about. It's a paper that I have for a larger project. I'm trying to connect some of the earliest images of going to cinema, and there I went to cinema. My first exposure to cinema as a preschool kid was at an exclusive military theatre situated in a military establishment that housed a regiment known as Madras Engineering Group. It was located on one side of the Alsur Lake. I remember watching several Western films, at times referred to as cowboy films, in this auditorium. The regiment specialized in that NBG, specialized in making bridges during times of war and drew its Jawans mostly from the suburban communities of North Madras and surrounding regions. Many cousins of mine sought employment as Jawans in what was a subsidiary of that, a boys' company. If I remember right, they were conscripted into the battalion between the ages of 14 and 16. The entry to the cinema hall demanded that be accompanied by a person, uh, by a person working in the regiment. More importantly, I wear a pair of shoes and a full sleeve shirt. You have to. You're a 4-year-old kid, but you have to do all that. Uh, of course, being of course, at that time, Bangalore enjoyed salubrious weather and was pleasant throughout all seasons. I remember watching quite a few cowboy films, the Western films as they call it, flashing guns and shooting at random while being mounted on speeding horses. Those are the images that you get. In some ways, Hollywood's Westerns informed my socialization into the film culture before I actually saw uh, any language films. I actually saw the Western films. I still vividly remember the white. Uh, yeah, after the movie, my older cousins took me to the dormitory to shower me with the military gastronomic abundance of what they call Varakana, a special dinner available once a month. Uh, I, uh, I remember, I still vividly remember the white plate, the metal plate, with a blue outer lining filled with unusually large pieces of. At that time, it looked unusually large pieces of meat. I was made to sit on the edge of the bed because my feet did not reach the ground to eat. I assumed that the Jawans did not have access to chairs. They did not have chairs to sit. Being a soldier was not considered a sedentary job. The arrival of chairs is a certain momentum of becoming a class actually. I always recall that Western movies because they're full of horses, guns and men, guns and men wearing boots and meat being roasted over fire in the open ground. Interestingly, the entry of the regiment was lined up, that is, as you enter the cinema hall, there were this real tall, dark men holding guns and wearing long boots who screened your identity And once you enter the hall, the screen is filled with white men and horses dangling firearms and shooting and killing each other at will. Perhaps the real fierce looking military men alongside the heroic white men on the screen have formed the primal image of what is to exist as full-blooded men in an Indian Jungian sense. Carl Jung, the student of Freud, what he calls the archetypes. Now, archetypes are image schemas produced through collective experience and are different from the symbolic content of personal experience, but remain methodologically indivisible. You cannot call it your personal. You cannot. It's methodologically indivisible. But it's enough to say that the affective intensities of experiencing images and sound in early childhood, be it the stamping of boots of real dark men outside, just outside, or the indiscriminate shooting on the screen by the white hero, appear to form the primordial images that may take a variety of disguises that prefigure the making of the Bangalore boy. It is not easy to differentiate military establishment from the screen images. The contrasting colors and the sound of the piercing bullets of grim men on the ground and the belligerent men on the horses, I guess the experience was nothing less than fearful and at the same time numinous. Numinous. There's something that when you enter a temple, it could uh, and there's a lot of music and all that. There's a certain surrendering to those acoustic. There's a surrendering to the ambience there. So this little boy surrenders to that ambience. To that, it's very. As he moved up the ladder, I have time. Okay. Okay. My first brush with popular print literature was closely aligned with my father's loyalty to Indian Express newspaper. Among the relatives, it was considered a status symbol to subscribe to an English language newspaper. The novelty of this cultural artifact came through my fascination with viewing rather than reading the illustrated comic strip of Tarzan. It used to be an illustrated comic strip towards the end of Indian Express. I don't think I started reading the text because I couldn't read. It appeared as a one column panel on the last page of the newspaper. As he sat on the chairs, my father, with a fully spread sheet, I used to quietly slip into the space between the ground and the newspaper and, look at this comic. Looking back, it looks like this sight of wearing spectacles, because he had the spectacles, and sitting on a chair to read the morning, the chair, the spectacle, was synonymous with emerging class-conscious, sedentary bourgeois culture. The teapot ornamented itself with a snuff box and a huge OUP dictionary. I don't know why you needed such a big dictionary to read a newspaper, but he did. An educated class acquisition and cultural artifact. Interestingly, the newspaper had a gendered afterlife. My mother used to collect the pile of newspapers at the end of the month and sell it to the man who procured old newspapers, used saris and utensils. There were people who were collecting all that, including liquor bottles. She either took money in exchange or bought new utensils from the same vendor. This is and what the newspaper does in the life of a newspaper in a middle class household, right? That's what Aristotle calls the recursive life of things. Newspapers were also used to pack chapatis when we were sent to the school and other dry defense for school-going children. Later, I found myself competing with my mother to sell the newspapers directly. I needed the money to go and watch Kannada films of Rajkumar and Vishnuwardhan in Matadale time. It's very now it's known as Ganganagar. And now it's got a regular theatre. There were two classes within the talkies. The one people sat on the ground, the other where the audience sat on benches. This is where teens learn to smoke bidis or cigarettes. For the Bangalore boy, newspaper produced a variety of experiences including rites of passage into adulthood. As the family moved up the ladder, I realized that it wanted to move away from this military culture to becoming a Sanskritizing a Tamil middle class household, which had images of Gandhi and names of the famous Tamil Congress leader Amaraj. My father took us to watch Shivaji Ganeshan's movie, which was exhibited either in Lakshmi Lavanya Opera Theatre. It was all part of the Alsur cantonment region. All the theatres were next to each other. My father shunned NDR because he's a Malayali, he was seen as a Malayali from Ceylon, and DMK somehow he felt did not disallow his urge to Sanskritize. His practices, and he had to Sanskritize because he had to grow in a central government bureaucracy where you feel, where you see other people. Not you're not working in a state government in probably in Tamil Nadu, you would have been a very different person, I suppose. As you're aware, Shivaji was close to the Congress party and was considered a more cerebral actor, chasing middle class pursuits, more universal pursuits. It suited the emerging pan-Indian mobile middle class family. In fact, usage of Dalits was not available till the 1990s for these kinds of families. I think it's the late 80s it happened. In a typology of my understanding, Shivaji Ganesh movies belong to the Congress Sanskritic Tamil model, and the NTR movies belong to the overtly political Dravidian model. Notwithstanding his earlier stint in socially conscious movies at Parashakti, I mean, he acted in Parashakti, the first movie of Parashakti, scripted by Karunanidhi, the later Shivaji Ganesh was strongly associated with the Congress party and seen as an actor that transcended social roles. I have had the impression that this Shivaji Ganeshan was featured in movies like Tanga Padakam, offered stereotypes for an emergent, what I would call as a non-Dravidian, pan-middle class, pan-Indian middle class, Tamil identity for people like my mother. Alongside, my mother insisted that we watch movies based on mythologies of renderings of these mythologies of popular deities like Adi Parashakti, Annai Abhirami, Murugan Adimai, and several other movies. The underclass Tamil women who came to watch this film sometimes got possessed in cinema halls and went into a performative mode. In religious studies, it's known as spiritual possession, as spiritual cantata, which facilitates an altered state of consciousness. Be it cinema or music, it was not merely entertainment. It was a production of a devotional subject as well. I conclude. Be it sport, music, cinema, or popular literature, the Bangalore boy drifted between diverse cultures that was not easily identifiable with what is now known as anti-caste thought. I think there are many genealogies of anti-caste thought, and we have not explored the many genealogies of the anti-caste thought. Neither caste nor linguistic or religious or regional identity subsumed his cultural energies. His comportment did not displace discursive intelligence, the Bangalore boys. Discursive intelligence, center of self-realization, self-worth. A kind of sensible intelligibility displaces discursive intelligibility, and this form of bodily awareness allows for a capacity for luminous experience. The embodied experience of popular culture has to be informed via the historical prejudice and historic logic. That is for now the story of the confluences of culture that we use the Bangalore word. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Thirumal, for an enlightening presentation. Uh, we have time till 12 o'clock. I will not take much of your time because we need some time for discussion, because the Thirumal has a lot of very, very interesting questions to be asked. And here, I think, to make few observations, I think Thirumal has contextualized the emergence of self in the context of, let's say, the multi-layered experience of Bangalore city as such, the luminal Bangalore city as such. And these cross-sectional transactions that you're talking about, because Bangalore as such is not a monolithic idea. It's something which is fragmented into various class, caste, linguistic, regional experiences. It is a world within a world. So in that sense, he's talking about the location of an emerging Bangalore boy. So the Bangalore boy is very handsomely looking at me, and he has made an extremely interesting presentation. And he has actually, you can see the product of Bangalore, right in front of us. He is someone who is a conglomeration of all those multi-layered experiences, multiple trajectories of experiences. So it's very interesting. What Nirmal was saying was, when I heard him say, it's true that Bangalore has this multi-layered diversity. On one hand, you have the cantonment area and the areas which are sprinkled with Tamil and Telugu-speaking population. Other hand, you have a contrasting cultural, geography, Malleshwaram and Masunduri, which are entirely different. Speaking, Kannada speaking, Idli Vada Sambar, Dasara Kirtane, that sort of a thing. And you have this cantonment area with, where young people try to learn and settle with guitar and like that, churchgoers, Christians, Tamil, Telugu, and absolutely all of them are caught into the context of what they understand to be modernity. Okay, that's very, very important. Modernity might give you a transcending identity in particular sense, but that transcendence is something which is limited to your traditional, what you can call as rootedness, essentially caste and class. So that's something which we need to experience. So it might not appear to be like that, but nevertheless, those are the fundamental identities which shape your reception of modernity and culture development too. And that I think he was hinting at it. So a caste never appears in the initial stages of his experiences, but nevertheless, the fragmentation of those experiences, the choices that people make, those communities make, is quite evident. The choices are historical. They are essentially, what you can call as award to historical connections that they emerge from. This last class concept. So in that sense, I think the idea of cosmopolitanism that we understand it today. So we are all, we aspire for cosmopolitanism. It is very secular, transcending these identities. But unfortunately for us, there's a lot of limitation to this cosmopolitanism. The sense, yes, there is one hand you have. I'm very interesting to say. I mean, I would ask these questions to you there. But what is important is when you look at this cantonment area, this cantonment area is a non-glamorous area today. If you look at it, sort of, I don't know whether I can use the word ghettoized. They are considered to be sort of a ghettoized area. Once upon a time, they were all happening colonial. You have British administrators living there. You have a lot of Anglo-Indians living there. But today, they are not the most happening places. They are slightly ghettoized now. So a lot of private people have entered and displaced the local population. But what happened to those communities which were very vibrant? In the initial stages of Bangalore, before the CS used to cover Bangalore, what happened to those communities? That's very interesting. I think they have all lost. But whereas the conservative communities have gone, they have become, these people have become ration card holders, those people have become green card holders. Bangalore, Pasalpuri, Malleshwaram. That sort of a development, that cultural evolution of these communities is very interesting to track. I think here somewhere, Professor Cinema was making an attempt to understand or to map those multi-layered experiences of being born and brought up in a Bangalore with what you can highly diverse sort of a setup, layered experiences in multiple parts of the city. Of course, that's something that is very interesting. So we have around 30 minutes or so for discussion. You can ask your questions. So I will also have two things to add and two things to discuss before statement. So the session is open for discussion. Thanks. Dr. Nikhila, Sita, do you have a mic?
Wireless mic. Camera, hide it. Thank you very much for tracing a particular type that I know so well in my growing up years, and also in some ways the distant other who had with to whom and it was a divide which you should not cross into, and the only moments you crossed into was often. When you went to watch films in Rex Plaza or one of these places. What is very interesting is what So I was just wondering how you would like to.
I'm sure it is very open-ended. You could arrive at multiple genealogies of this. Coming from Malaysia itself, you could do completely different things with that Bangalore boy. And uh, but it is true that what is seen as Bangalore is not so much the the cerebral, intellectual, uh, what do you call, uh, that part of Bangalore which that is not particularly highlighted in this Bangalore board. Uh, I do not know reasons why that is not being highlighted and only the school and whatever the cosmopolitan thing that is highlighted. Uh, so I think it depends on what is your project and what you want to do with it. If your job is to uncover multiple genealogies of Bangalore, behind that cool, you could. I'm looking at military as a source of the self, and military as something very primordial in that sense, not the military as a combative field. Uh, in if I go to the other side, it could be the ancient scriptures. The sources of the sun could be completely different. I'm just guessing. Because if you look at multiple playgrounds here, you can have at every street corner you could have a temple on the other side, just contrasting the world. So where one could invoke a certain past, an erratic past, a certain kind of, let me call it a dramatic past in one sense. But here, that kind of holy past doesn't exist. It is a very muddy kind of a past. It is not so to speak, an invoking of time, invoking of a time outside the time that we are living in is much more easier in much more practice on an everyday basis because of the rituals and other things that they do on the other side than what they do here. I mean, I don't know if I mean, I'm just trying to engage with that question. I still don't know how to do it, but I think if you're going to if you're going for a multiple seniority, that's possible to do. Thank you.
Hello, sir. Thank you for enlightening us. I heard of you from Professor Kanchan Madhik and Mrs. Pavala, and today I am very much blessed to listen to you. You enlightened us about modernity, maturity, and corporate experience. When I'm talking about the contemporary Bangalore, the image of Bangalore in a multi-layer fabric of the settings of smart city or the digital culture. Everything digital is associated with Bangalore today. And yesterday, Professor Manu Chakravarti was talking about the conscious. So today, how is techno subjectivity associated with Bangalore, with in context of digital cities and everything digital is here. We experience it in our everyday context. So how would you like to take your take about it? Thank you. Yeah.
Uh, I did not broach the subject of techno-subjectivity here at all. For one reason, a very historical reason, that I think the IT revolution was bypassed as cantonmentary. They're outside the race. Um, so, um techno-subjectivity, if you want to study, it's of a particular sub-region of of uh, uh, of uh, uh, of Bangalore. If you're talking about Bangalore, but techno-subjectivity in a larger sense that you want to do as theoretical maneuver you're thinking of. Um, um, I still have a feeling that if you want to study something like meme culture, I can go for a deep past, like Professor was talking about a medieval period where you can look at a reader, the performance of reader. You could draw a much longer path of so that the techno subjectivity in a cultural studies mode. Yeah. Yeah, they don't. so, so when you do cultural studies of the kind that is done, let's say uh, in Calcutta or even in Hyderabad, there is a tendency to see history as a break. We don't work with the idea of continuity. For me, even if I want to study digital culture, if you read Arjun Apadarai's piece on what he calls as it's something on the sensorial technologies, how they argument sensorial capacities, but actually because of a certain what do you call sensorial attunement of the Brahmin community, it does not allow itself to because sense of extending sensorial thing is also about socializing, and socializing is a problem. So what he calls the terror of the senses, he calls it. He calls it. So there's so many ways of entering that debate, but I'll just leave it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was fascinated by your talk. And I was thinking about something that you spoke about early in your lecture about the loci of social, right? Where is the locus of this kind of a construction of the socius itself, the imagination around the socius? And I was thinking about the word cantonment, a series of laws that were passed around the cantonment, the spatiality of the cantonment, which in very curious ways links to the subject production that you're talking about. Also, I was thinking that this loci is a part of the Nehruvian, legacy, like a Nehruvian socialism, which was still at the point of time that you're talking about, is evolutionary and not revolutionary. So that there is a delicate balance that is attempted between. I mean, I'm taking up the word cantonment itself, which is talking about maybe a not so dead past and a not so born future, which is in the process of being born, but is not yet born. So there is a delicate poise between the two, and cinema also. Like for example, when the new wave comes to Malayalam, it is upsetting some of the earlier premises around such subjectivity, because there is a deep introspection that comes in the latter part of this era, which is also an offset of the disillusionment with the PSUs, with the 5-year plan, and all that you're talking about. So the semblance of democracy, the semblance of secularism is a very interesting, it's a very curious phenomenon to be talking about at that particular historical juncture. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Brother, highlights ಬಿಡಿ bro, highlights ಬಿಡಿ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಆಯ್ತು
I'm somebody who thinks that the Nehruvian socialist period and the current uh, unfolding of history uh, are not completely uh, discontinued. There is um, there is a certain appearance of things as it were in the Nehruvian period, and it may look very different now, but somewhere there is what I would call there's a mobile essence across these two, and semblance. Uh, yeah, you're right. I mean that's that. But somewhere I don't want to characterize that something called Nehruvian socialism was there and that it changed things and that it fundamentally altered the way subjects were produced in this country. I'm not very sure about that kind of a formulation. Things began to look up because after 50 years or 60 years, there are communities completely left out of IT revolution. If Hungarian socialism was strongly grounded, I don't think they would have been left out of the IT revolution. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Thank you.
So I'm just inquisitive to know that how the modern filmmakers use cityscapes as narratives and also as an emotional device to communicate tensions or memories or any sort of transformations happening within the society. However, I also presume that such movies fail to grab the attention of the youth. um, a couple of movies from Kannada, that's Arthur and Co and Bharat Stores. These are experiential movies. However, they have not come into the limelight of the mainstream cinema world. Now, one speaks about the disturbing familial ties, and the other based on the impact of globalization. Now, I just want to know why cinemas fail to attract people with such a strong, motive or the thematic issue.
I'm not a typical media, film studies scholar. I wouldn't know how to respond to that question. Uh, but in terms of memories, I think it does carry collective memories. I mean, cinema does carry collective memories. That's what you're asking. Uh, if I understood, are you saying Bharat Ki Khoj was something that people didn't watch? Is that?
Bharat Stores is a Kannada movie.
Oh, I haven't seen it.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
But now it's based on the impact of globalization on the small property stores in and around Bangalore.
Okay,
With
okay.
the advent of this small culture and everything.
Okay, okay.
Now, my question is like the changing cityscapes or the transformations that's happening.
Right.
We have number of books
Yeah.
printed.
Yeah.
All these ideas are reflected in the pages. When it's been transcended,
Yeah.
the transformation from the pages to the print culture to the show business.
Uh,
Why is it failing to attract? There's no particular target audience as well, but the youth have to get such sort of messages. Somewhere the cinema or the filmmaking is losing that grip or I just, it's my inquisitiveness to know something about the cityscape.
yeah, but why we are not having courses around those kinds of issues? Why? It could be applied to any areas, no, not necessarily cinema. Do we have enough courses on globalization literature classes? No, no. I'm saying the burden of that responsibility. Why it should be on filmmakers and things?
Because it's a medium, it has become a mass channel these days. A prime thing to reach people, especially the youngsters. These youngsters in today's generation, they have lost love for reading, at least through documentaries or short movies.
I'm not sure whether you were there yesterday for a wonderful presentation.
I missed it,
Yeah,
sir.
what
Yeah.
is the- I wish you were there. There was some interesting insights from my colleagues there sitting around. I don't wish to repeat. Thank you.
No, I have a question. No, you focused more on the cantonment experience, migrant experience of the RT barracks, the meta samples and things like that. Was this ethnic or, slash caste experience the predominant experience? Was there consciousness of them belong to a particular segment of society, a particular cultural constituency? Was there some consciousness? I'm sure this consciousness was very much strong and prevalent in Basanagudi and other areas, Malaysia. So they insulated themselves from other, let's say, interventions, culturally. Okay, though they tend to be very modern, they took to STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and went abroad, all that. But their core, the cultural core remained the same. I don't know how, because they were very conscious of their cultural roots. So I don't know how was it prominent in the cantonment area, and how did they negotiate their relationship with other segments of society?
The DMK had, yeah, they had. So there was a, but I'm talking about a slightly, that's not the thing that I was, that's a very conscious thing. But these are things you also consciously trying to avoid. That's
The another important, hallmark of Mangalore, which I think forgot, was Bishop Cottons. Predominantly, these are the type of people who ran that school, who went to those schools, both girls' school and boys' school, apart from this night. And recently, I had to go to Bishop of Girls' School for an admission. I found a lot of these migrant Tamil-speaking crowd trying to getting their children into Bishop Cottons Girls' School, and most of the faculty and teachers, they were all people who were migrants. Probably they appear to be, I might be wrong, neo-converts, sort of, neo converts. So that was my impression. So that's there, that legacy is also there. In fact, those are the people who benefited from those schools. Is it time for the next second question to begin?
Yes, and thank you all. Thank you, sir, for that insightful session. I call upon Professor Mamta Madam to come on the stage to felicitate Thirumal sir. Please. Ma'am, the chairman of Department of Mass Communication, University of Mysore. And now I call upon Professor Nikhila Madam to come on the stage to felicitate Professor Dasatre. They were all classmates in Bangalore, from Bangalore University. Senior school. Our, now we have got the technical sessions, parallel presentations. It's going to happen in the science building, Vijnan Bhavan. 10 rooms, we will be having paper presenters presenting their papers parallelly. So in each room, according to the schedule, if we have allotted 10 paper presenters for each room, and you also mentioned the names of the people who chair the session. And at the same time, I request you all to assemble at 2 p.m. in the same auditorium. And at 1:30, the lunch will be served in the Ganga building. Okay. So after the valedictory function, we will issue the certificates. Only after the valedictory function, we will issue the certificate.